Good morning. That was so wonderful. Thank you. This morning's meditation comes between Earth Day and Mother's Day. Earth Day in Grand Haven was particularly wonderful this year. Kudos to everybody that made it so memorable. Mother's Day is next Sunday, and it will be hard for me this year because of my mother's passing in February, and hard for others in this community whose mothers have passed. I'm looking at you, Chuck Tawney. So today, in honor of Earth Day and in honor of my mother, I wanted to talk about lilacs. Syringa vulgaris, common yet magnificent, distinctively fragrant, the joyful harbinger of spring. My mother loved lilacs. I hope to bring some sprigs of lilacs from a tree in my yard, but they're not out yet. I thought they would be. They're not. So this meditation is in anticipation of the blossoming of the lilacs. When I was a girl growing up in St. Joseph, we had a lilac tree in our yard just beyond the back door of our house. My mother told us we were very lucky because our lilac tree happened to be a fairy tree, a tree where once the lilacs bloomed, real fairies would visit in the night. If we put food out for the hungry fairies, they would leave presents for us, one for each child, which at that time there were probably 4 or 5. So we left Cheerios and pieces of cookies and crackers at the base of the tree, and the next morning the food would be gone and there would be small labeled gifts hanging from ribbons on the branches. My mother also had a love of fairy tales, fantasy, and she instilled a sense of wonder in her 11 children, along with a love of music, art, birds, trees, and lilacs. As a girl, I completely bought the fairy tale gift exchange scenario. Of course, fairies left presents in trees for children. I believed in fairies. In hindsight, I know that I was a girl who needed to believe in magical creatures and magical journeys, especially as my family grew and my home life became more populated and more routinely chaotic, with 10 siblings when I left home for college at 17. Decades later, I tried to recreate this fairy magic with a lilac tree in the backyard of the house my daughter grew up in here in Grand Haven. When she was little, I told her that our lilac tree was a fairy tree, and if we put food under it, fairies would come and leave presents. She was very interested in this as a scientific experiment. But in the morning, she was skeptical. "Mom," she said, "how could a tiny little fairy get this toy onto a branch and tie it with a ribbon?" Interestingly, it wasn't the existence of fairies that she questioned, just their ability to hoist large for them objects into the branches of trees. Chloe was her father's daughter, a scientist, a skeptic, a child who routinely suspected that she wasn't being told the whole story. But back to lilacs. Did you know that there are over 1,000 varieties of lilacs? Did you know that the lilac tree is related to the olive tree, and that white lilacs are the most fragrant, and that lilacs symbolize different things in different countries? In ancient Persia, where lilacs are thought to have originated, lilacs represented renewal and love. Purple lilacs are said to represent spirituality. Spirituality for the 21st century? I hope so. For the few years when we lived in a house without lilacs, my husband Richard used to go late at night to areas where there were abundant lilac trees on public property. Lakeshore Drive near Rosie Mound Natural Forest area, a forest of lilacs, and bring them home to me in the back of his car. We put them in vases all over the house and felt like outlaws. Like the mother in Rapunzel who had to have rampion, I had to have my lilacs. Another lilac story. Some time ago, Doris Rux asked me if I would speak about being a writer at a Muskegon elementary school that was having a career day. When I arrived at the school, I parked on the street and saw a woman on the other side of the street with large pruning shears, cutting purple lilacs from a huge patch of old bushes and laying the lilac branches into the back end of her unmistakable blue station wagon. I called out Doris's name, and she turned with her arms full of lilacs and said, "You won't report me to the police, will you, Margaret?" Then we went into the elementary school together, where all the children called her Granny. Now my two youngest grandchildren have a quite large fairy tree at the back of their yard in an old neighborhood in Milwaukee. When the lilacs bloom, they leave food for the fairies and received gifts from the fairies. My granddaughter told me about this phenomenon with no reservations about its believability. Her two mothers both bring lilacs into the house when they bloom. I've been there when this happens, usually a few weeks after it happens here. The fairies live. The lilacs prevail. Walt Whitman wrote perhaps the most famous poem about lilacs, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. But I will conclude with a lesser-known lilac poem by Amy Lowell, a New England poet who died in 1925. In 1926, she received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry posthumously. Lilacs was her favorite poem and the one that she most frequently read in public, aloud. It's a long poem, and I will read only the last stanza, though I recommend the entire rich and deeply mystical poem to all who love lilacs. In this final stanza, I've taken the liberty of changing Lowell's mention of New England to a mention of Michigan. Lilacs, false blue, white, purple, color of lilac, heart leaves of lilac all over Michigan, roots of lilac under all the soil of Michigan, lilac in me because I am Michigan, because my roots are in it, because my leaves are of it, because my flowers are for it, because it is my country. And I speak to it of itself and sing of it with my own voice, since certainly it is mine. Thank you.